release patterns and where you want routes to stem to, where you want breakpoints to be. I think that's critical. Because if you just copy certain like Dagger, for instance, right? In the NFL world, Dagger to the wide side of the field, right? The dig route, most teams coach that route to break at about 18 to 20 yards. They want that route to stem to the outside edge of the numbers, break in, and that ball should be caught around the hash, right?
What's going on, everybody? It's Coach Rob, and I'm blessed today with a guy I've been following for a long time, author of, I believe, 36 books, and owner of Alert the Post, with a ton of offensive schemes and with weekly content, daily content on X. One of the top guys on the business. Maybe you don't know his name, but I promise that you've seen his books. I have one right here. You've seen the books. I promise you, floating around X and Amazon and all that. Just great content, great material. I'm talking about Bobby Peters. Bobby, how are we doing today?
Pretty good, Rob. Good to be here.
Yeah, again, thanks for coming on, and I want to jump right into it. So for people who only know you from like Cut Up Fridays and your manuals, I mean, you've covered almost all the NFL, the Lions, the 49ers, the Dolphins, the Commanders, the Texans, the list goes on and on. So who are you before Alert the Post, and what's your football background?
Yeah, so I graduated college about 10 years ago now. Always wanted to get into coaching, even when I was playing. I was a student assistant up at University of Wisconsin-Platteville. Wow. That's kind of like my first taste into coaching. I was doing laundry, doing film, uploading to Huddle, all that fun stuff. But I got to hang around the coaches, got to hang around in a lot of pretty cool offensive meetings back then. The coaching staff, Mike Emmendorfer, Ryan Munns, and the rest of the staff there were pretty cutting edge with some of the spread stuff they were doing. They were, maybe a year or two ahead on some of the RPO styles that we ended up seeing later in college football, closer to the 2015 time. So they, it was pretty cool to kind of be at the forefront of some of that. So that was kind of my first taste into coaching. And then, graduated college, jumped into coaching high school ball. I was quarterback's coach at a nearby high school. And then I, started calling JV offense for a couple years. And then, slowly. And then, 2021, 22, I was an offensive coordinator. Took a couple of years off because I got some young kids, wanted to spend more time at home. Right. And long story short, when I got into coaching, I've always been one to, back even in college, like I subscribed to, the NFL Pro. I forget what the platform was called back then. Right? It was like $10 a month. You get access to the coaching tape. And I'd spend late nights, in my dorm room watching that stuff. Right. Taking notes, filling up notebooks with just different ideas, different routes that work against different coverage techniques and all that stuff. And, so I've always wanted to study the game and try to, improve myself as a coach. Right. And then, I had the ability to start, doing like full season studies, right? Like, oh, this offense is super interesting, right? Like kind of like the Kyle Shanahan offense of like 2016 with the Falcons. And then even, I think Matt Nagy's offense in 2018 with the Bears, kind of like that Andy Reid offshoot. And then obviously Sean Payton back in the 2010s, he was a lot of fun to study. So, I was cutting up film for like a full season, and somebody gave me the idea, like, hey, why don't you self-publish a book and like write about it? I'm like, I don't even know where to start with this. And eventually one thing led to another. I started to figure out what I wanted to do with it. And then it first started off, I started doing in 2017, I did a couple like third down manuals, which were, a lot less than doing like a full season breakdown, right. A little bit thinner on that side of it. But it eventually kind of led, every year I try to grow it and evolve it. And I actually got some neat things up my sleeve this year for the manuals that I'll be doing this year, to hopefully enhance the product. But yeah, it was always something that, I've always wanted to study, the best NFL coaches, because I feel like at the NFL level, like the talent level is a lot closer than it is at college ball. And I feel like the coaching matters that much more in the NFL, right? Any edge you can find with that stuff is going to separate your team. So that's kind of how it started. And then, thankfully people, slowly over time, people have become interested in it. And, there's people out there with the same interests that I have. So it's been good to kind of continue to grow it.
Yeah, I absolutely love the material, how you break it down, and it really saves the fan or the coach the time, because you're doing all the research and you're putting it into a book. And I love the design of the cover. I mean, it's almost like, it calls out to you as a coach, because you see the play design, you see all that. It's outstanding. Really an awesome design. I'm sure you came up with that, but it's just cool. Just the simplicity of it, but how complex, it's eye catching when you see the book. You just want to like, hey, what is this all about? So when I bought the first one, I was like, man, this is just outstanding materials. So when you were in college, were you padding? Have you been padding plays for the longest time? It's been a long, have you grown since you've been doing that? Like, take me back to the first early days of just like padding a play.
For sure. Like, I mean, even going back to high school, like I grew up and still live in the Chicagoland area. And when I first fell in love with the game, I was probably like, like 7, 8 years old, maybe somewhere around the time when the Greatest Show on Turf kind of made their footprint on the NFL landscape, right? Like kind of that 99 season with Kurt Warner.
Right.
And that's kind of like that's like when my first memories of like watching the game and like, that high flying offense. I mean, they took the league by storm. And that's kind of when I just started getting into it. So when the Bears hired Mike Martz to be their OC in 2010, I was like, this is awesome. Like the Greatest Show on Turf is coming to Chicago. Right. So that's kind of when it started in my parents' basement. Like I started recording the games like on the VHS, right? I'd go back, play the broadcast copy and just try to draw up as many of the concepts as I could and try to see like, oh, they're running this concept each week but out of different formations, just real rudimentary stuff, right? Not necessarily drawn up every front that the run game's going against, and kind of like just that's kind of the seed, this planting the seeds for it, right? And obviously mentioned in college, watching like the 2013 Broncos with Peyton Manning, just kind of drawing up that stuff. And even now, like with where it is now, like with the manuals, like what I try to do, and this is something that like I've spent time trying to figure out too. It's like, all right, there are so many play calls, right? Every play like that these guys call on, like depending on the coach, like could have a different name, right? So what I try to do is I try to bucket like concept families, right? Like if there's a flood variation, I don't try to get specific with like what type of flood it is. I try to like group it all together when I'm cutting up and labeling the tape, right? Because that's the key to the manuals is like I individually cut up each play, so I have a library to go back to when I'm writing it, right? So like I watch each clip for that section. I'm like, okay, what am I seeing? How are they coaching it differently than other teams in the league? Is there anything I can glean from the tape on that? But like being able to bucket stuff in families, like if you can get that skill down, that's a great starting point for trying to grow your knowledge if you're trying to get into watching tape.
Yeah, definitely. And that 99 Rams team, that was one of the ones that I think back to where I wouldn't say I never necessarily fell in love, but the design, just the concepts were just so next level when I watched those. Because I'm not a Rams fan, I'm a huge Cowboys fan, but watching that is like I wanted to study more and more of that because just the concepts were next level. And they did an outstanding job, obviously. Greatest show on turf. So, I mean, it's really awesome. So us talk about you watching football now. Do you still watch football as a fan, or is it all when you're watching, you're seeing structures, tags, families, tendencies? I mean, how are you, consuming football now?
Yeah, so obviously most of my time is spent with the coaches tape. I've got 3 young kids, so trying to devote a Sunday to sitting down, just kind of on the couch watching football. It's hard. Like I've got my kids get into it a little bit, but we've always got stuff going on. But with the Bears being watchable for the first time in like 5 or 6 years this year, that I try to carve out some time to watch some of those games, but most of the time is spent like on late nights, early mornings during the week. Spend an hour here, hour there, trying to get ahead on the different projects I've got going. But and then college games on Saturdays, I'll have those on in the background too. But it's hard to like weekends. I try to keep as much time as I can for family stuff comes first. It's just kind of how like the setup we've got in our house, and then at time like late nights, early mornings is kind of when I try to sit down, maybe spend an hour or two on the coaches tape, at a time.
Yeah, definitely. And your Bears really beat my Cowboys up pretty good earlier in the season. I was hoping we could win that because it's coming back to bite us now on the record. But look, walk me through day one of studying a new team. So say you're studying the 2024 Commanders or the 2023 Packers. What does your setup look like? Laptop, notebook, cut ups, game list, tags. Like, can you just walk me through day one of studying a team?
Yeah, so like for the manuals, I try to like let the season play out a little bit, right? Like especially for the first manual that I choose, because like I've done like before, after 2 or 3 weeks of a team being good, I've been like, oh wow, I need to jump in and like start a manual, start cutting up the tape on them, and then like a month later, they're like a bottom 10 offense in the NFL, and I'm like,
Right.
nobody's gonna want to buy this, no one's gonna want to buy this book, even if they're doing stuff that's interesting, they're just not doing well with it. So I try to let like a couple months pass of the season, and then I try to narrow down who I want to do, and then I start cutting up the tape. I'll watch the all 22 and I'll try to decide, okay, is this interesting, right? Because like I don't want to write about something, even like the Chiefs are a good example. Like they've obviously been incredibly successful over the last 5 or 6 years, but their offense to me is more about Patrick Mahomes being great and finding ways to make plays, and Travis Kelce kind of ad-libbing routes versus their scheme, helping those guys succeed. And not, obviously they do stuff well. Like I'm not discrediting Andy Reid whatsoever, right? I look at a team like, like the Ben Johnson Lions of like 22 or 23, right? Like the Rams cast Jared Goff off for absolutely nothing, right? He was
Right.
a afterthought at that point. And, obviously huge credit to Jared Goff, but like the scheme around him and what they tried to do to kind of try to fit, Jared Goff's skill set. He's a top 5, top 10 quarterback in the NFL right now, right? So to me, that's more interesting. And obviously, like, Ben Johnson was doing a lot of good stuff, and he's still on the forefront of a lot of, in my opinion, some of the best scheme designs in the NFL. So that's kind of where like the starting point of like trying to figure out what I want to do for like the teams I want to study. And then like once I kind of narrow that down, I'll take I'll take the game file, and every year this kind of changes depending on how I can get the tape. But like, I've got to be able to cut it up into individual clips and label those clips like that, like I talked about. Writing a book without that and having to like go back to like NFL Pro, I mean, it would be impossible to do, and it would take way too long. So the ability to do that has really abled me to do what I do. So that's what I do, and then I'll cut that up, and then eventually I'll try to get all that into like I'll try to get that data into a spreadsheet with like, like the down and distance, right? The yardage. And then I use that to create the tables in the book. I've got like a formatted spreadsheet that I can kind of plug and play with once I get that data in there. And then, when I'm writing each section, I'll sit down. I'm like, all right, I'll watch each, each concept, right? I'll formulate my general thoughts as far as like how they teach it, how they seem to be attacking with it, what they're trying to do with it, and kind of like some of the neat variations they had with it. And then obviously the why it worked and why it didn't, I really look at like, okay, what part of this concept was successful for them? What, did like for the Commanders, right? There was one of their, I'm trying to remember, I think it was their front side spot dig concept, right? So they got like an arrow route, a snag route, and then like a basic wrap route behind it, or like a dig, like a 10-yard basic cut behind it. And they were super successful with it. And I'm like, obviously the concept is sound, but Jaden Daniels just had a really good feel for the timing and the spacing of that wrap route, right? He was able to anticipate that route better than a lot of the other routes in their offense. Like that was probably his best anticipatory route that was in there. And that jumped out to me on tape. So I wanted to include that in the book. So stuff like that, like that's kind of the general process. Then, the game planning books, I just go week by week, and those are easier to write in the sense that, I don't need the full season cut-ups for that. What I do is I'll go through a game and I'll pick like the 10, 15 best, most interesting plays or the most well-executed plays. And then you kind of have that on one screen where I'm watching that, and then I'm writing and drawing on the other screen, to plug and play and just kind of go through it that way. That's less time consuming. It's so like the just kind of like big picture, right? So like the manuals, the concept-based manuals, obviously they're more comprehensive and they provide value, but like the game planning format allows me to kind of dig into, like say, what I'm trying to think of. Okay. So like the Broncos last year, I did a Broncos game planning book. All right. So say there's a couple concepts that Sean Payton called that like they only called maybe 4 or 5 times through the year. Like that concept's not going to make the manual because it's not a core part of their offense. Right. But in a game planning book, if it's interesting and it worked well for them, I can focus like, 4 or 5 pages on it. So it allows me to, each book kind of has like a different purpose, right? As far as like what I'm trying to look at.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about, you've got cut up Friday, situational cut ups and formational cut ups and, concept cut ups, talking about the 2024 Commanders cross wave, the Lions draw, Vikings choice jerk, Broncos keeper, Ravens GT counter, Texans inside dig. How do you decide what makes the cut for its own post or cut up?
Yeah, so those specifically, right? If I've written a manual on one of those teams, and then even the 24 Lions, I didn't write a manual on them, just because I ran out of time over the summer. But I still did a full season cut up. So all those cut ups, especially specifically the cut up Friday ones too, because during actually earlier this week, I posted some like Rams cut ups from this year. But those obviously it's not comprehensive because the season's not over, right? It's just kind of like what they've done, and I say that in the article too, right? This is like their full cut up of this concept up to week 9 or whatever, right? But like most of those are full season cut ups, so everything that fits into that family, like I post and I include in that cut up, right? Because it's valuable to go through and like, okay, this one was executed well, but like, okay, somebody busted her out on this one, and being able to see it all kind of grouped together allows the viewer to understand like, okay, like this play looks different, but like it's the same play, but somebody just ran like a different type of route, or they had a different type of vertical route over the top, or somebody busted their route or something, right? There's a lot of value in being able to watch like the good and the bad kind of all lumped together like that, right? And as a coach myself, right, anytime I try to install a concept or try to learn a concept, you need to be able to see all like as much of it as you can to try to find the pros and the cons of it. So that's where I think the value of that comes in. And then even for a fan that might be new to it, all right, so now once you watch like a 10-minute cut up of a concept, when you see it on a Sunday, like that muscle memory of seeing all the different variations of it kind of fits in, and you can kind of understand what you're seeing a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So you've written full resources, on you're talking about the Lions, the 49ers, the Broncos, almost the whole NFL, the Commanders, the Vikings, Texans, Ravens. When you zoom out, how different are these guys really? What does Ben Johnson feel like versus Kyle Shanahan, Sean Payton, Mike McDaniel?
To me, they're very different. I think, especially like, okay, so like the Sean McVay example is a great place to start because he's got so many of his disciples calling offenses right now, right? Like especially last year, like I did a game, like I've done a manual on McVay before back in their Super Bowl season of 21. And then I did a game planning book last year. So I've written a couple books on his offense. And obviously his offense has changed a ton from 21 to 24. And even this year it's changed even more. Like I've written, like I was thinking the other day, I'm like, because I'm cutting up Rams tape too to try to keep up with what they're doing, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to
Right.
write another manual on them because they're doing so many different and interesting things now, and they're having a ton of success with it. So like that's gonna have to probably be another. If they keep this up, that's gonna be another manual this year. But so like I've got a good baseline of what Sean McVay wants to do over recent years, but last year with Kevin O'Connell having a ton of success with Sam Darnold, and then Liam Cohen, being one of the top
Yeah.
offenses in the NFL with Tampa Bay, they were very different. So like, Sean McVay last year, the Rams are really, and even this year to a degree too, but they're expanding a little bit this year. But last year they were masters of like, they had a handful of run plays, a handful of pass plays, and then play action, obviously in screens, but like they would dress them up every week and just rep them and be really good at them, right? Like think like duo, right? So like my 24 Rams game planning book talks about all the different ways they get to duo. It's the same run scheme like for the offensive line, right? We block the 4 down and 2 backers, but like the way the wide receivers handle different secondary rotations and how they dress it up looks different to the defense every week. And then they have like runs off of it that kind of protect it, right? Whereas you look at, that's kind of like what they want to do. If you look at the Vikings, they call duo out of like one or two. They call it like out of 1 or 2 looks, and they mix in some outside zone. But Kevin O'Connell spends probably like 80% of his time drawing up like explosive pass concepts. So like my 24 Vikings manual is just chock full of explosive pass concept designs. They're seeing 2 high coverages, but they're still finding ways to push the ball downfield to Justin Jefferson. Like that's insanely interesting, right? Especially like a high school or college coach. If you've got a star receiver, but defenses are like bracketing him, they're playing cover 2 over the top or playing like a match quarters where they're bracketing him. Like the Vikings found ways to still get the ball to Jefferson in those situations. So that's insanely interesting. And then you look at a team like Tampa Bay, their run game was incredibly diverse. They're running different counter variations. They're running sprint draw. They're running like, different creative Lamb variations against odd fronts, which I haven't seen since the Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh 49ers days. Like, he really expanded out his run game. And then pass game wise, their 5-step passing game on third downs, they were one of the best third down. They were the best third down offense in the NFL last year, converting over 50% of their third downs. I don't know where that ranks historically or like in the last 5 to 10 years, but that's got to be one of the top rates. So like I try to spend as much time, on their different, third downs, and even on Alert the Post, I've posted some third down cut ups for them. But just those different aspects of and then their screen game. I spent 40 pages talking about Tampa Bay's screen game last year. They were averaging like 9-10 yards an attempt, like on their different running back slip screens, tunnel screens, tight end filter screens, and the designs on these screens were incredible. Like some of and Dan Casey and I actually did a video a couple months ago on 2 specific tunnel screen designs that were really unique that I hadn't really seen before, and were able to kind of spark the offense for big plays. So, those examples, right? Like both of those guys are Sean McVay guys, but their offense is kind of branched out. So that's a really good way to look at it, right? Like obviously Kyle Shanahan's different, but like even coaches from the McVay tree do things very differently and approach it differently. But like their underlying thought process about the way they like see offensive football, generally speaking, they come from the same starting place. So like that's to answer your question, they're very different. To make a long story short.
That's why we brought you on to have these conversations. So I love hearing it. So one of my favorite offensive coordinators is Kyle Shanahan. So you did a piece on what keeps Kyle Shanahan at the top. When you finished that breakdown, what was the final answer in your head, and like what is his superpower?
You're testing my memory. That was about a month or 2 ago when I posted that one. But what he's always, just generally speaking, and I haven't watched a ton of Niners tape this year. I've seen a little bit here and there, but what he does is he wants to run the ball out of 21 personnel looks, like running full flow outside zone types, right? And every week they find different ways to do it and kind of protect it. They do such a good job with that. And, even in the drop back and the play action game, right? They've got their core staple concepts, but every week he's got 8 to 10 different variations of them that are really creative and unique that, attack kind of protect a base concept a little bit better. Like I remember last year against Seattle, they're running their bang pivot concept, which I believe they call Chevy in their offense. It's like you got that bang, that 7-yard mini dig coming behind it, and then you've got what I call a pivot route, which is like kind of this number 2 receiver will take like an outside release. He'll sit down at 4 yards or he'll break out, right? And he's kind of reading the flat defender. If there's a hard flat defender out there, he'll sit. If there's nobody in the flat, he'll break out. And that's kind of one of their bread and butter front sides. Well, in the Seattle games last year, they tagged a couple of creative, unique backside concepts that I hadn't seen before that I included in the in my 24 49ers game planning book that really protected that concept really well, right? If defenses push like a safety or if they push an extra linebacker too, these plays that like Brock Purdy could reset his feet for you had guys breaking wide open. And specifically those 2 matchups like stuck out to me for examples of that. But like they do such a good job of just tying everything together really well.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So let's go into some of the coaches maybe that are out there listening. So if you had to hand a young OC high school offensive coordinator one of your breakdowns as a master class in game planning, which one would you pick?
Ooh, the best starting point, I think, for like if you're a high school coach, might be my 2020 Packers book because I think what Matt LaFleur did that year was they really condensed down what they wanted to do. They were a duo inside zone, outside zone run team, and then they built their play action, their keepers off of that. They were a really good keeper team that year. They had some man zone checks in the pass game. They had a concise 5-step menu, and then they were a pretty good quick game team, right? Aaron Rodgers is, he's thrown slant flat how many times in his career, right?
Right.
So that's probably like when I think of like volume, that's like the least amount of volume that I could probably think of, right? But I think the Rams too, like they fit into that category as well. They push the ball more downfield with like 7-step stuff too. So like the 21 or 24 Rams books are a good place to start with that. But those 2 are probably the most like when we think of like high school, right? It's probably like most people think like okay, less volume is like where I want to start, right? And those are probably the 2 best starting points with that regard.
Yeah. So where have you seen high school coaches get themselves into trouble trying to copy stuff? Is it too much volume, like you said, wrong personnel, poor practice structure, or just maybe not understanding the quarterback's progression?
I don't know if I've seen too many like failure cases, but I think in my situation, what I've because like I've tried to pull a lot of this stuff like into the offenses that I've coordinated, even now as a receivers coach, like try to tie in like route techniques and stuff. And I think the biggest thing you have to start with is the field spacing. I think you have to understand that in the NFL level, right, the hooks and the flat zones, right, and the over the ball, like middle of the field areas look different because the hashes are tighter. So you have to understand spacing and like release patterns and where you want routes to stem to, where you want breakpoints to be. I think that's critical because if you just copy like certain like Dagger, for instance, right? In the NFL world, Dagger to the wide side of the field, right? The dig route, most teams coach that route to break at about 18 to 20 yards. They want that route to stem to the outside edge of the numbers, break in, and that ball should be caught around the hash, right? But at the NFL or at the high school level, that you got so much more space to the wide side of the field that like if you're trying to like high-low a hook defender, if you've got your dig from big splits, inside release going vertical and then, breaking in, if you, depending where you've got that hook control route, the spacing could be all jacked up. And then another thing with like Dagger too is like, and this is less about, high school coaches trying to copy it, but that's a concept that I've seen over the years where like a lot of high school coaches like don't understand that it's like a hook control, like it's like a hook conflict pass concept. And they'll like run like a flat route with like a vertical and then a dig. And it's like, well, that flat takes the flat defender, but there's nothing to control that hook player. So understanding, like when you see a concept on tape from an NFL team, understand who we're trying to conflict, right? And then what are the auxiliary routes? What are they trying to do, right? That vertical route, right? We have to coach that vertical route to run through the inside shoulder of the near safety so he doesn't see the dig route, right? If you just run him on like an outside release vertical, but if that cover 4 safety is playing like with inside leverage, he can turn and see that dig route breaking coming into his vision, right? So you have to understanding the coaching points, and then obviously the field spacing is critical when trying to adapt a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So looking at your archive, whether it's misdirection runs with the Dolphins, the Vikings, high red zone sizzle reel, McVay bringing back levels, all 4 open quads, fast motion stuff, all the RPO variations. If you had to predict the next 5 years of offense, what do you think that's going to look like?
Oh, I don't know, man. Year to year, I mean, even year to year, like, this year we've seen in the NFL, like a lot of the people that I like to listen to that talk about like NFL, trends and like the NFL talk shows, like, talking about like heavier personnel usage right now, right? Like 13 and 22. And I've been trying to keep up with Bills tape and Chargers tape, and they've been two really good examples of that, right? Last year with the Broncos, I diagrammed as many heavy personnel runs as I could with them in that game planning book because like it was insanely interesting. And I think right now we're seeing a lot of that because a couple of reasons, right? Like you talked about, like, RPOs are a way to control defenses that want to, sell out to stop the run, right? Depending if we got bubble screens, to account for nickels trying to dive in, into the run fit, or like slant routes, like kind of the old Doug Peterson type RPOs, right? Where you lock the backside tackle, run the outside zone one way and try to peel slant routes in behind it. There's this, it's hard to call RPOs a lot in the NFL every play because you put so much on your quarterback's plate too, right? Even just like on a normal snap, you're calling a play. It might have a kill, it might have an alert, it might have an audible. You got to look for at the line of scrimmage. When you call a 13 or 22 personnel run play, you don't really need a lot of that stuff, right? Because whatever look you're getting for, you got the extra tight ends to kind of protect you and what you're trying to do there. So that's been a trend that I've seen, and then even the play action stuff off of that. Like I think the Bills are a good example of a team where I've seen a ton of success where like we're calling like a flood variation, right? Depending on what we're trying to do with like the routes on the outside. When I call a flood concept, I'm conflicting the flat defender, right? So I've got to occupy that hook defender somehow. And when we go play action, we want him to bite on the run fake. Well, when I go 22 personnel and I've got two tight ends on that side of the field and I've got a guard pulling, that linebacker, he's got to think run, right? So that's one way to do it. And then obviously if you want to, in the drop back game, get 5 out, and then if the hook player helps underneath the sail route, okay, when I got like a backside dig or something coming into his vision. But I think those two things right now are like we're seeing packages grow, and the Rams have jumped in that bandwagon the last month or so too. But to kind of predict like where things go, I mean, it's cyclical, right? It's like for years, teams were trying to spread and spread defenses out and try to make bigger box defenders play out in space. Well, now defense has gotten lighter. You've got lighter nickels. Defenses want to keep their nickel on the field more. All right, let's bring in extra tight ends and make them defend the run. It's kind of like some back and forth. I think as an offense, being able to do like kind of the Rams are a good example this year. They can go 11. You've got Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams on the field, and they've got a full menu of passes and runs out of those looks they can get to. But the way they've coached up their 13 personnel package right now, they can run their whole offense from 13 personnel, at least their run, play, action game, screen game, and all that stuff too. So like the ability to kind of pivot each week, right? Oh, this team has a nickel we can take advantage of. All right, let's go lighter personnel, right? Like stuff like that. Being able to, run being able to run what you need each week, depending on what you're seeing from the defense, generally speaking. However that looks year to year, it's going to change. But I think that's kind of where offenses want to go with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll talk about motion for real quick. You think we are at peak motioning right now, or do you think there's another whole wave of motion or formation coming for defenses?
I think so. We're similar, right? Where it's going, I'm not sure. I think where we're at right now, I think the last couple of years, we've seen teams in both in the run and pass game use kind of these fast and escort motions to kind of create leverage and to create leverage in the pass game, to create free releases, but also in the run game, like teams escorting tight ends and fullbacks to change the gap math quick on defenses. And I think teams that understand that and do that well are able to help out their offensive line a ton in the run game. Where we're going with that, I mean, the Dolphins have been. I haven't stayed up to date on Dolphins tape this year just because I've been watching some other teams, but like what they did last year when I was studying them for my 24 game planning book, like the different variations off of that. So they would call something what I call guide motion. So it's like it looks like they're selling that escort motion. So the tight end starts on the right, right outside the tackle. The quarterback will snap. So and he's sprinting to the left. The quarterback will snap the ball when he's over the right guard, and then he'll peel back to the right and then like kick out the defensive end or lead through the B gap or what have you, right? So like they're selling that escort motion. So like the backers have seen that on tape. They're going to bump to the left a little bit. All right, well now you've regained leverage back the other way. So just kind of playing off like what the current trend is and try to build things off of that motion-wise, I think is a great way to kind of see where that's going.
Yeah, definitely. And I got a couple more kind of more rapid fires. We get ready to close this, and I appreciate your time. If you could only keep one lane that you're in right now, would you do the manuals, the cut up Fridays, or the podcast? Which one would you keep if you only keep one, and why?
I think they all tie together, right? Like the cut ups that I post like to the Substack are a result of the full season studies, right? So it's kind of like, you know, I do a full season study. I can write about it. I can post the videos about it. I think, you know, if I had just had to do one between like the manuals and the game planning books, like that's hard because like I said, I see benefit in doing both. I think, you know, if I could only do one, maybe just the manuals, but I think you know, because I think that's like somebody new to football or somebody that's like a newer, you know, not quite like you know, they need like the large overview helps instead of like, ooh, look at this really specific version of this play, right? It's a really good like full picture view of an offense. You know, if I only had to do one, I'd obviously pick like the best offenses, the most interesting ones, and focus on that. But like I think they all kind of tie together. They're all different versions of the same thing.
Right, that makes sense. What's the most underrated concept in football right now?
uh, Underrated concepts. So like Dagger is one of my favorite. I mean, that's an NFL staple. I think there's a lot of meat on the bone for that to be successful at the lower levels of football too. I think college OCs are kind of pulling more from the NFL stuff. That's another discussion for another day. But I think college play callers have pulled a ton from the NFL in the last couple of years. And I think the different ways of getting to Dagger and attacking defenses that way are a big one. I think it's just kind of like you can run it against anything. You know, and you can protect it and game plan it differently to fit whatever defense you're seeing. So that's fun. But the last month or two, I've really spent time retooling how I install and coach the high cross concept. A lot of that has to do with watching like Lions tape over the years and even the Bears a little bit this year, like and how Ben Johnson has approached it and just kind of making it more foolproof and just the way they get to it, the different variations with it have been insanely interesting. So just you know, then this morning, like you mentioned, I posted the Commanders like cross wave variations. Like the wave is the version of high cross where you've got two frontside verticals instead of one. That's kind of how I differentiate them, and that's a neat variation of it. That's has different benefits against different coverages than just like having like a post with a crosser, right? Kind of like the more traditional ones that we've seen over the years. So those are the two. Both being like 7-step concepts off play action, or even, Dagger you could drop back to, and even the high cross stuff you could drop back to. But, I find the ability to push the ball down the field, and this kind of gets back to my love for the greatest show on turf, Rams, but like the 7-step family of concepts, if you do it right, kind of like how the Lions have over the years with Jared Goff the last few years, and the Vikings with Kevin O'Connell, and the Rams, those are probably the three best examples of teams that push the ball with these 7-step concepts. And they're some of the most explosive offenses in the league. So being able to coach that stuff up well and protect it, like the different protection variations with it, are insanely interesting to what I've been seeing lately.
Yeah, definitely. So I got two more for you. So the second to last is, what's the most overhyped concept on the flip side of the coin of the question just asked? What's the most overhyped concept that everyone calls, but few people are actually running it well?
One of the hot discussion items in the coaching world is at least at the lower levels, is mesh. I'm not a huge mesh fan. I even in my books, like when I write about it, I talk about like, okay, this has like, if you're going to call and design a mesh variation, there's a lot of criteria I talk about to like that make it work. Cause I see so many poor variations of mesh where it's not man, the offense is getting in big trouble. And just to kind of take a step back and define mesh, like mesh is is kind of defines the action of like two shallow crossing routes at like 2 to 3 yards, kind of crossing each other at near the line of scrimmage. There are teams that do it well, and the teams that have done it well over the years. But to me, it's if you're not getting man, you have to be very careful on how you're designing it. And especially like on third downs in the NFL or even at any level of football, you're rolling the dice, right? If you don't get man, you're in trouble. You're putting your quarterback out to dry. Like it's not one that I'm a huge fan of. And then over reliance on RPOs and not understanding the purpose for RPOs. Teams will run like like a bubble, like an inside zone bubble concept, right? And if they're seeing, like specific, if they're playing like a single high or a man team, right? Like, why are we calling bubbles, right? Like they've got 3 for 3 over there. We're not going to throw it. Like if you want to RPO, let's figure out better ways to do it. There's a lot of, stuff like that just doesn't necessarily make sense, right? It's not as foolproof as you think it is. So those are probably a couple examples where like there more thought needs to be put into how we're designing and calling this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So last question. You're calling a play for your life. One call, must score. Everything you've learned is on the line. What are you dialing up, and who's running it?
Jeez. Yeah, I mean, without knowing like any of the situation stuff,
Right.
without knowing anything, anything else, I think right now, Dagger, like I said, Dagger is probably one of my favorite concepts, different ways to get to it. So it's got to be some version of Dagger. And I mean, Matt Stafford right now is just cooking. I mean,
He is.
I think the other day he threw, it wasn't like a true dagger. It was like a backside dig, but like it was like a dagger depth route. Like it was like a big dig on the backside. It was like an 18-yard dig to Devontae Adams. They called against the Saints. And he did like, usually for his no look stuff he's done in the past, like that Super Bowl no looker, it's like on that bang route. It's that bang pivot concept that we're talking about, where like he tries to control the play side hook defender with his eyes and then tries to throw the ball behind him. He did this on a backside dig now, right? So he's looking front side. He hitches up to his backside. He sets his feet for the check down, right? The back check releasing out of the backfield. And he kind of throws that thing without really looking, but he knows where he's putting it. So I'd be very, what's the word? I'd be very remiss if I didn't peg Matthew Stafford for throwing that deep dig cut right now is probably my favorite call.
That Matt Stafford is definitely cooking. So Bobby, I appreciate the time. I'll leave the last word to you. We said we keep around 35 minutes. Here we are. I definitely want to do it. I mean, it's impressive. All your libraries of information, and then this talk has been very fruitful. So I'll leave the last word to you.
For sure, yeah. If you want to learn more, alertthepost.com is my Substack. I try to post as much as I can there, whenever I got time to squeeze something in. But for every Friday, I at least post one cut up. I've got a cut up library on there that you can go through and just kind of scroll through and look exactly what you're looking for, right? I try to make it easy for people to kind of find what they need, if you're trying to learn more about a specific concept. And then if you want those deep dives, if you really want to take dives into, you like what you see on there, if you go on my Amazon, all my books are there. So if you search my name or, I have actually in the top of my website, I have like a banner for the books too. So if you click that, it'll take you to my author page. You can kind of scroll through there and find the offenses that interest you. But those are the best places to find me. And like you said, I'm pretty active on Twitter or X, at @B_Peters12. So that's a good place to find me.
Yeah, definitely. I'll make sure I link everything to it. A lot of great information there, Bobby. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Of course, man. Thanks.
Thank you.